Hey everybody, it is Dak here from the Ed Boys, and welcome to my first impressions video on the Arceuus Spellbook rework. This is going to be one of two videos on the topic. I'm going to be splitting it up into combat and non-combat spells. This video is going to be focused on the combat-related spells. Part 2 of the first impressions video will be linked in the description as soon as it's released. My goal here is not to give a detailed guide of all the possible ins and outs of each spell and each scenario. It's rather just my first looks and opinions on the spells currently in the game. Jagex recently gave the Arceuus Spellbook definitely a needed rework, which included some new unique spells and unique mechanics to the game. The majority of these spells are locked behind a new quest called A Kingdom Divided. It is a long quest with many answers and even some more questions about the storyline in Great Corrin. I think they did a really good job on the quest. It's not very difficult, but it's not short and easy necessarily to get the new spells. The Judge of Yama, also one of the quest bosses, gotta say, one of the cooler looking monsters in the game. I was a big fan. I like the quest overall, and if you want to use the majority of these spells, you're gonna have to get this quest done. Diving into the spells, the first one I wanted to check out was the Resurrection spells. Resurrection is an interesting mechanic that brings sort of a necromancy combat style to the game. We were already able to reanimate heads to get some prayer XP, right? But now we can reanimate dead stuff to actually fight for us, which is really cool. There's 9 monsters known as thralls that you can resurrect. 3 different tiers. You have lesser, superior, and greater. And then 1 monster for each attack style in each tier for magic, range, and melee. You're going to need 38 magic for the lessers, 57 for the superiors, and 76 magic for the greater thralls. To cast each of these spells, you do have to have the Book of the Dead, which is a reward from the new quests. It either has to be equipped or in your inventory, which is nice. It gives you other shield options. You don't have to wear it as a shield, but you do have to bring it with you. It's also going to cost some prayer points every time you cast them. The higher tier thralls costing more prayer points. When first trying this out, the thralls were pretty cool. I like the look of them a lot, and I think it's a more unique mechanic to be able to add some DPS to your grinding rather than just like a different type of poison or something. Having all 3 attack styles also helps out for making them a little bit more widely viable. The high-level ones only have a max hit of 3. They have the attack speed of a whip, and they're accurate enough. They're pretty accurate. I feel that the DPS is pretty low, if anything, though. It costs 6 prayer points and over 2k in runes to spawn 1 thrall. They don't last super long. You get 1 tick per magic level, so if you're 99 mage, you get just about a minute of thrall action per cast. You're going to need about 120k an hour in runes, and 360 prayer points is like 30k in prayer potions currently, depending on your prayer level. Something like 150k an hour is not super expensive if you're making a lot of money back, but I do feel that these are a little bit more useful in like safe spotting and slayer situations where you're not making as much money, but you're still looking for better DPS. Not that they would be useless for all bossing situations, but like it's hitting a 3 max. It's really not insanely helpful. Overall, I guess what I'm saying is the thralls could be a little bit stronger. I have not used them against a lot of higher level things, but that's because I already feel underwhelmed with their power. If you just made them cost less to spawn, that would only be a minor help, so I'd rather them do something like even give it a max hit of 4, would bump it up a little. Slayer training is definitely where I personally enjoy the use of these mostly right now. Like, they can kill things like Bloodvelds fairly well, but I also like to bring Alks or bursting spells or like Bones to Peaches on my Iron, which I guess you could use tabs, but what I'm getting at is that there's other spell options, or spell book options, I should say, that are a little bit more tempting than just having a little bit of thrall help. The Demon Maiden spells are very straightforward. They just do big damage, and they can only be used on demons. They do have a 25% boost in accuracy and strength if the opponent has been marked with darkness by the Mark of Darkness spell, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. Magic, for combat at least, is rarely used outside of bossing, unless we're talking about something like bursting in the catacombs, but that's for multi-combat purposes, and Demon Bane spells don't hit multiple targets. In other words, these spells could be used for like a magic version of an Arclight. You could fight Abbey Demons, I guess mainly the Sire you would try it on, Cerberus, Skotizo, Zami, even the Ice Demon in Chambers of Xeric would all be affected by this boost in damage and accuracy if you first marked it, the Mark of Darkness. Unfortunately for fighting Zami or Cerberus or Skotizo, they all have good magic defense, and I imagine fire spells are still the way to go with the Ice Demon because they crank. It's really not that super useful for most of the demon bosses. Hitting a 50 plus with the Demon Main spell is not that bad, but currently I don't really see any situations where I plan on using it, I guess. Next, we have the grass spells. First of all, I know that I pronounce my P's horribly. It sounds like I'm saying grass bells. I'm sorry, it's just gonna happen. Grass spells are a mid-power spell that also bind the opponent in place for a short period of time. So it's like being able to use like a firebolt and a bind or entangle at the same time, though the freeze is very minimal with grass spells. You only get a few ticks of being frozen in place. These are clearly going to be used more in PvP than in PvM. Unfortunately, for it to be useful against any NPCs, you really want to be using Demon Bane spells to fight with, since you're already on that that spellbook, and you don't really want to be using magic while wearing range gear, so like grasp and then using range is really not the best option unless you're bringing a lot of switches. If you use like a trident with grasp, you wouldn't have to be using demon bane, so it wouldn't have to be against a demon. But like, which bosses are you fighting with a trident that you also need to freeze in place for a couple of ticks? Off the top of my head, none of them. So it's clearly meant for PvP currently. I'll bring it up again later, but I don't do that much PvP, so I won't have that many of my own situations where I would be using this on another player. I can see where this would be scary while running from a PKer. I do a decent amount of wildy bossing. They can catch up to me while doing damage instead of like having one guy freeze. Well, freeze spells do damage already, but in this case, if they're already on the spellbook, then they could start using like corruption, and they could have smite on, so they could be really draining my prayer pretty quickly overall. There's just a different strategy here, I guess. It adds something different rather than a new meta as far as I can tell. But again, from a PvPer's perspective, I don't have the best opinion on this one. Let's talk about the Mark of Darkness and the Ward of Arceuus. The Mark of Darkness is an effect that you can put on another player or monster. Anything that is inflicted with the Mark of Darkness will take the following debuffs. Grasp is going to hold twice as long as before. Demon Bane spells will do 25% more damage and have a 40% boost in accuracy. And the Corruption effect will basically double. I'll be talking about Corruption more soon if that doesn't make any sense yet. The Mark of Darkness will last longer if you have higher magic, just like when summoning, or don't say summoning, my god, just like spawning a thrall. You get 1 minute for, or excuse me, 1 tick for each magic level. So if you're 99 magic, you get a minute worth of Mark of Darkness from one spell. It only costs a soul rune and a cosmic rune, which is like 250 coins. So it's super cheap to use, and it helps out for some of your other spells. The Ward of Arceuus is pretty much the opposite. Instead of debuffing your opponent, you just buff yourself by giving yourself the Ward of Arceuus. While you're under the ward's effect, you are immune to corruption. A grasp is only going to last a single tick, and demonic creatures have their damage reduced by 10%. The first two effects are only helpful when being attacked by another player that's using this spellbook. That 10% increase in damage is pretty cool, though. This could be used against, I don't know, Zami is a really easy example. Zami has very good KO potential. Definitely in God War's dungeon, I'd say Zami's got the best knockout potential, but being able to get a 10% damage decrease from that could be very helpful. Even something like the Sire, you're not going to get knocked out by the Sire very easily. It's not that dangerous, but it's reducing the damage you're taking overall during the whole fight. That means you're using less food, you're using less time to eat, so you're attacking more often. It's very beneficial to be able to take less damage, so I like it. I'm going to move on to Corruption, which is a PvP only thing at the moment since it just drains prayer points. I guess technically, one of the new bosses in the new quest inflicts you with Corruption, but for using the Corruption spell to then put that effect on another, it's only a PvP thing currently. Using either lesser corruption or greater corruption doesn't inflict the status on its own, it just makes your next attack have a chance to inflict corruption. So you don't use corruption on an opponent, you use it on yourself and then attack an opponent, inflicting them with the ailment. A player inflicted with corruption loses prayer points over time. I don't do any PvP really, so I don't have the best opinion on how good this mechanic is for actually winning a fight, but that doesn't mean I don't find it interesting. It gives a different mechanic than just smite to be able to drain your opponent's prayer, which means you could be using protection prayers while draining your opponent's prayer. That's also kind of dangerous, like I brought up earlier, for running away from PKers in the wilderness. They could drain your prayer pretty heavily if you're trying to protect an item. But I don't think the potential for corruption really ends right there. There could be more PVM uses for it in the future too. We already have monsters that use protection prayers, gorillas, the Calphite Queen, for instance. Corruption could potentially like turn off their protection prayers. Maybe not for these bosses that already exist in the game. They're generally balanced. Being able to just turn their overheads off could really mess with them. But I wouldn't be shocked to see the corruption mechanic on a new boss, some situation where it's protecting from everything, so you have to drain its prayer with corruption first. I don't know, could be interesting. I like the idea of the corruption mechanic. I probably won't be using it a lot in the near future though. Death Charge might be my favorite spell in this video. When you cast Death Charge, you'll gain 15% special attack energy after your next kill. You can only use the spell every 60 seconds. Special attack energy regenerates at 20% over a minute. You get 10% every 30 seconds. What this means is Death Charge won't quite double your special attack usage, but it can add a lot of specs to your fight, which could be super useful in some situations. This would affect activities like Slayer more than it would bossing, in my opinion, since you're killing more monsters in Slayer. If you're grinding on a boss that you kill at a slower rate, so you don't get that many kills an hour, you're not getting that much energy from Death Charge. Or if you're fighting something like Corp or KQ, where you're heading to your house very often, so you're always recharging your special attack anyway, this is not going to be as helpful in general. During a Slayer assignment, though, you're very likely killing more than one monster a minute, so you can nearly double your specs on maybe a Dragon Dagger, or even a Saradomin Godsword, which could nearly negate the need for other supplies if you're hitting pretty well. It costs around 715 coins to use the spell at the moment, but you can't use it more than 60 times an hour, which is like 43k in runes currently. I would consider that pretty cheap to use, even if you're just doing a Slayer task that doesn't make much money, so I'm very interested in it. I'm not trying to say that it couldn't be helpful at bossing, as I talk Slayer up here. I mean, the God Wars dungeon bosses each have 3 minions, and if you're soloing, usually a full kill plus the respawn timer is going to be longer than 2 minutes, or at least 2 minutes, I should say. That means you can get an extra 30% special attack energy per kill. This could be a big deal. This could be extra Warhammer specs at Bandos, or if we're going back to the Saradomin Godsword, it could heal you up a bit. At DKs, it's very possible to kill 20 of each king per hour, so you can get your full death charge uses in, plus there's other monsters around the room that you could get a cheap kill quick on for some more special attack energy. Obviously, you can't bring Ancient Magics if you're bringing death charge, which means no blood spells if you're trying to heal with them, but this gives another interesting option for potential healing or DPS related specs. In general, there's a lot of special attacks and there's a lot of niche situations where having an extra special attack could really help you out, so I really like having another mechanic that restores special attack energy. I like the new combat-related spells in the Arceuus Spellbook. For the most part, they seem really only viable if you're using a combination of them to get a lot of perks out of them. Obviously, like the Mark of Darkness added on to your Demon Bane spells, it's designed that way. But even a combination like Resurrection and Death Charge, if you're using Death Charge for extra SGS specs, and then you're getting more prayer points to pretty much negate the amount of prayer points you had to use to spawn the thralls, can make them a little bit more useful. If I were fighting Zami, I would want to have Death Charge, obviously, but then you don't leave home without that Word of Arceuus on that one. I'm trying to give some credit here on their general usefulness before I say that they are pretty underwhelming. I feel for the most part, the other spellbooks still have better offensive perks than this one. You can't really bring multiple spellbooks with you unless you're draining some spellbook swaps from lunar spells. It's generally not very practical. They made some slight changes already in the spellbook, but nothing major. They changed the Dark Lures exact mechanic on Implings, but since that isn't a combat thing, I saved it for the other video. Overall, what I'm trying to say is it's possible they could make some buffs if they felt it was necessary, and I mean, this is just my first impression on it. Clearly, the more time we have with the spellbook, the more time there is to build a meta around it, but I don't know how great that meta is going to be just from my own first impressions, I guess. If you're looking at a video about the utility or the skilling spells from the Arceuus Spellbook rework, unless you're watching this video on day 1, it should be linked in the description. Before the release of the spellbook, when it was just a blog, I was definitely more interested in a few of those utility spells they were adding, so I'm very excited to actually try those out in the next video. I'm not trying to say I hate the new combat spells either. I find them very interesting, but definitely at the end of each spell, I more often than not in this video said that I didn't find it to be that useful. It's just underwhelming in general, and as of right now, I don't see myself getting a ton of use out of most of these spells quite yet. Thank you for watching the video, everybody. I do hope you enjoyed. If you did, or you just got some useful information, be sure to like and subscribe for more content. I do stream on Twitch. That link should be on the screen and in the description. I also have a Twitter. I also have a Discord. Those are also linked in the description. That's about it. Thank you very much for watching, everybody, and best of luck on your, I don't know, a Kingdom Divided quest?